Hello and welcome to Epilogue, Press TV's book review show. I'm your host, Ken Livingstone, and today we'll be looking at Dominic Raab's book, The Assault on Liberty. But before we begin, here's a short video to introduce the topic.
The British idea of liberty through a liberal democracy, developed over 800 years, is now caught between conflicting tides. Since 1998, the British government has undergone a shift. That year, the Human Rights Act was passed in France. The Act formed part of a broader government strategy that some claim to seek to anchor Britain to Europe and introduce a socialist conception of human rights. But others argue that this Act has paved the way to allowing the government to curb personal freedoms and take away liberties. In 2001, the Anti-Terrorism, Crime and Security Act permitted detention without trial. In 2005, the Serious Organised Crime and Police Act introduced a ban on unauthorised demonstrations around Parliament. These can also be applied to other areas, if the police wish, to stop demonstrations anywhere. This undermines the right to protest, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. In 2008, it was the Counter-Terrorism Act that allowed supposed terrorist suspects to be detained by police for up to 42 days, without being charged. It was later rejected by the House of Lords. The UK now has the dubious privilege of having the largest DNA database and the most CCTV cameras in the world. Some critics say that Tony Blair and New Labour's mantra, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, has created the conditions for a Big Brother surveillance state. Yet despite all of the surveillance, today's author states that police-recorded violent crime has increased by 80%. In today's epilogue, we seek to discover the consequences of this legislation, if the current surveillance society is at odds with the British legacy of liberty going back hundreds of years, and finally, what is to come.
Today I'm joined by Alex Dean, the director from the UK website Big Brother Watch. That's a campaign fighting intrusions on the privacy and liberty of Britons. And also with us today from the Law Faculty at the University College London is Rodney Austin. He's written extensively on terrorism and the new constitutionalism, as well as the Human Rights Act. Well, I'm delighted you're both here. I'd like to start with you, Alex, because you're broadly in agreement with the book.
Yes, and with the introductory piece we just saw.
Excellent. Do you really, though, believe that this would have been, we'd been in a very different situation if, say, we'd had a Conservative government over the last 12 or 13 years? I mean, all governments do this inevitably.
I don't know whether we would have been in a different position. I just know that I don't like the position we're in now. And I know that over the last 14 years, we've seen an increasingly authoritarian streak emerge from New Labour, and I say 14 because Tony Blair was doing it before he became leader, and let's not pretend he didn't tell us he was going to be like this. But I think people would be surprised if you told them in 1997 this will be the most authoritarian government Britain's had in recent times. So to that extent, I think that there is a very negative effect from the most recent government, yes.
There'll be people watching this around the world who live under really authoritarian regimes where they don't have a vote. They'll be looking at you and think, this man must be mad. We'd all love to be living in Britain and have that degree of freedom.
And I wish that those people were freer. But the extent of the limits on their freedom mean by no means that we ought to be less free ourselves.
Well, now, if we take a different perspective on this, which I suspect we will get from Rodney Austin, do you think that this is a fair critique, that this great shift, the erosion of our liberties, has just really happened under Blair and Brown? Or is this just the natural tension between those in government who always think we're doing the best we can, people should trust us and let us get on with it?
I think, to be fair to Labour, it probably was more authoritarian than the previous government because it was faced with the terrorist crisis, which it saw as changing the rules of the game, which I profoundly disagree with. The previous government was, in many ways, highly authoritarian. It restricted rights of public demonstration under the Public Order Act 1986 and also Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 94, including on private ground.
The right to silence.
The right to silence was diminished, and successive governments have successively eroded our traditional civil liberties. On the other hand, the Labour government and I do disagree strongly with the criticism of the Human Rights Act, the Labour government did introduce the Human Rights Act to incorporate the European Convention on Human Rights, and that seems to me to be one of the greatest safeguards, and has been taken up by the judiciary as one of the greatest safeguards. And the idea that it's somehow an un-British import from Europe is nonsense. It was actually drafted by two English government lawyers in 1950. So it incorporates most of the traditional British rights, fair trial, etc.